By 1943, the Soviets had learned the surest path to victory at Stalingrad. Encircle the Germans in a pincer, then squeeze until the last man fell or surrendered. But that formula suddenly collapsed at the Taman Peninsula. Here, the land itself betrayed them. A narrow, swamp-choked spit of mud caught between the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea. A bottleneck. There was nothing to flank, nothing to encircle. The Germans had sealed it behind a wall of bunkers, barbed wire, and minefields so dense they could be plowed like farmland. At the center stood the Red House, a jagged slab of concrete buried in the shattered ruins of Novorossiysk, fused to the city like a tumor to the bone. A fortress built to bleed men dry. Hitler was confident it could hold for a year. Stalin gave his soldiers 30 days. No retreat, no excuses. Drive the Germans out or be buried beside them. Early 1943, the Soviet offensive had torn through 400 miles of German-held territory, liberating the Kuban region meter by meter. Then it hit the Blue Line and stopped on its tracks. General Erwin Janecker had turned the Taman Peninsula into a fortress. His 17th Army, 400,000 strong, sat behind defenses that dwarfed the Atlantic Wall. 2,860 guns, over 100 tanks, 300 aircraft. But the real genius was the design. The Blue Line stretched from the Azov Sea along the Kurka River. The Germans had built a massive earthen berm on the western bank, turning the river into a moat. Behind it, marshes and flooded lowlands that would swallow entire divisions. The northern approach was worse. Narrow channels between swamps where one machine gun could pin a regiment for weeks. The central sector offered 20 miles of dry ground for Soviet tanks. The Germans built 2 concrete bunker mazes there, connected by trenches, separated by the Eastern Front's densest minefields. In the southern mountains near Novorossiysk, entire districts became fortresses, basements linked by concrete reinforced tunnels. Streets were barricaded with rubble and mines. Behind the Blue Line, more defensive positions waited. The Bucharest Line, the Berlin Line, Munich, Stuttgart, Ulm. The Germans had even built something called the Little Gothic Line, running from Temriuk to the Black Sea. Hitler called it Fortress Taman, one of his last hopes. If his northern offensive succeeded, these forces would burst forward to seize the oil fields. But things were not going great for the Wehrmacht. Since February 4th, a small Soviet beachhead had clung to life at Novorossiysk. Among the Red Army, they called it the Little Land. 7 months of constant German attacks hadn't dislodged them. Colonel General I.E. Petrov had every intention of hitting Novorossiysk, where the Black Sea Fleet could provide naval gunfire. Break through there, roll up the German flank. Among his forces was the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment. The Germans had another name for them, Nachthexen, the Night Witches. 200 Soviet guns opened up simultaneously on the night of September 10th, 1943. Then came the young women of the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment, climbing to 1,200 meters in their PO-2 biplanes. These were old plywood and canvas trainers converted into bombers. At the signal, they cut their engines. In eerie silence, they glided through the darkness. To the Germans below, it was a haunting experience, an ominous whoosh followed by fire and destruction. The first bombs fell on ammunition dumps near the harbor. Then the October cement factory erupted. German searchlights slashed the darkness, hunting for the source. When they found the slow-moving biplanes, the flak opened up. That's when the German night fighter struck. 4 PO-2s caught fire instantly, spiraling down like falling stars. 8 young women, most barely into their 20s, burned trapped in their cockpits. The survivors pressed on, dropping their remaining bombs before limping back to base. Behind them came the rest of the 4th Air Army, 150 aircraft in total, turning the night sky over Novorossiysk into a storm of fire. After 7 months of preparation, the assault on the Blue Line had begun. Soviet torpedo boats knifed through the darkness into Novorossiysk harbor. They didn't bother with ships. They fired their torpedoes straight into the jetties and German positions on the piers. Following them came cutters packed with assault troops. 3 battalions of Soviet naval infantry and NKVD troops hit the docks under heavy fire. At 3:15 a.m., the main ground forces moved. The Western group burst out of the Miskako beachhead, that stubborn little land that had survived 7 months of German attacks. The Eastern group pushed through the mountains north of the city. Both groups ran straight into a wall of German steel. Reinforcements poured into the contested zones. Within hours, 2 of the 3 Soviet assault groups, the naval infantry and NKVD battalions, were torn apart. Only the 1339th Rifle Regiment managed to hang onto a few blocks near the harbor. By nightfall, the 1339th was surrounded and bleeding out. The 1337th Rifle Regiment tried to fight through to them, but German machine guns covered every approach. The relief force had to claw for every meter, but by dawn, they'd linked up with what was left of the 1339th. Then, finally, a breakthrough. At first light on September 11th, the Eastern Group, now reinforced with tanks, smashed into the October cement factory. The German line cracked. Soviet armor poured through, racing to link up with the rifle regiments fighting in the city. For the first time in 7 months, the Blue Line had been pierced. Up north, the 9th Army launched its own attack through the marshes. They couldn't break through. The channels between the swamps were too narrow, too well defended. But they kept the Germans busy, preventing them from shifting reserves south to Novorossiysk. The German High Command read the writing on the wall. Holding Taman was impossible. On September 4th, Hitler had already authorized Field Marshal von Manstein to begin evacuating the Taman Peninsula if necessary. Now, with Soviet tanks loose in Novorossiysk, the 17th Army started its withdrawal across the Kerch Straits to Crimea. It would be orderly, methodical, and costly for anyone trying to stop them. The Germans had turned a suburban apartment complex into a fortress that ate Soviet soldiers by the hundreds. It was called the Red House. The first assault waves were caught in the open, machine guns firing from every window, every doorway. When Soviet gun crews tried to wheel their artillery into direct fire positions, German snipers picked them off before they could fire a shot. Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns moved up. Methodically, they began taking the Red House apart, one wall, one floor at a time. Concrete dust mixed with smoke as 76mm shells punched through the building. But the Germans had built deep. They kept firing from the basements, from tunnels connecting the ruins. Finally, Soviet combat engineers crawled forward with explosive charges. Under covering fire from the tanks, they reached the building's foundation. The charges went off like underground thunder. The Red House collapsed in on itself, burying the defenders. But the momentum was not shared by every Soviet unit. On September 14th, the 56th Army launched its assault on the central sector, straight into the teeth of one of the most fortified parts of the Blue Line. Soviet tanks rolled forward under murderous direct fire from German 88s. They reached the edge of the minefields and stopped. Engineers rushed forward to clear passages. They managed to blow gaps in the minefield. But the moment the first tanks pushed through, German anti-tank guns zeroed in. Every tank that exited the cleared lane burst into flames. The infantry, cut off from their armor support, went to ground. The attack collapsed. September 15th brought better luck. The Soviets threw everything into a renewed assault. This time, the tanks broke through the forward German trenches. To the south, the 18th Army captured Sugarhead Mountain, blasting open the approaches to Novorossiysk itself. The German 4th Mountain Division, threatened with encirclement, began pulling back. The Blue Line was crumbling. By nightfall on September 16th, Soviet soldiers and Black Sea Fleet Marines raised the red flag over Novorossiysk. The port city was free after 7 months of occupation. Up north, the 9th Army was fighting a different kind of war. Chest deep in stinking marsh water, Soviet soldiers waded forward using inflated inner tubes to stay afloat. They were in pursuit of the fleeing German army, but neither they nor the terrain were making the task easy. Those lucky enough had flat-bottomed boats, but most slogged through the muck on foot. Romanian mountain infantry and dismounted cavalry had turned every piece of dry ground into a trap. Like a rehearsed domino effect, the Germans fell back to their next prepared positions, while they made the Soviets pay for every meter. The race was on. Soviet tanks from the 18th Army punched through to Anapa on September 20th, reaching the Black Sea coast. After one more day of street fighting, the port was theirs. But across the Kerch Straits, German evacuation ships worked around the clock. The Soviets tried everything. The Black Sea Fleet landed small assault parties between the lagoons and marshes, trying to cut the narrow coastal roads. Every landing met fierce resistance. The Germans couldn't afford to lose those roads. On the night of September 25th, the Soviets played their biggest card. 8,500 men came ashore near Salt Lake, landing on the peninsula from behind in an effort to crush the German evacuation. Their goal was Taman City. If they could take it, they'd slam the door on the German escape route. For 2 days, the landing force battled through German rearguards, supported by every aircraft the Black Sea Fleet could muster. Meanwhile, the 9th Army slogged through hell. Soviet soldiers pressed forward in small boats and with inner tubes, just as they had at Wolf's Gate. Fortunately for them, another 1,600 men landed west of Temric. On September 27th, Temric finally fell, but it was already too late. The German 3rd Minesweeping Flotilla, hauled overland from the Baltic Sea on 64 wheeled transports, orchestrated the evacuation with ruthless efficiency. Every night, ships shuttled back and forth across the straits. Men, vehicles, horses, supplies, everything that could be saved was saved. The numbers were staggering. 255,000 Axis soldiers evacuated, 21,000 vehicles, 1,800 guns, 74,000 horses, even as Soviet artillery found the range and aircraft bombed the ports. The Germans kept loading. The 97th Light Division and 4th Mountain Division held the final perimeter. On October 9th, at 4:47 a.m., Generals Rudolf Conrad and Erwin Janicke stepped aboard the last boat. German heavy artillery on the Crimean shore fired final protective barrages across the water. When Soviet soldiers entered the abandoned positions, they found only destruction. The Germans had left nothing useful behind. It was a bittersweet victory for the Soviets. They had managed to reclaim the Taman Peninsula in record time, but they had been humiliated by their inability to stop the German evacuation. The losses were also sobering. The Germans suffered over 10,000 casualties, including 4 division commanders, 36,000 wounded. Romanian troops accounted for another 1,600 losses. But Soviet losses dwarfed them all. 114,000 casualties, over 40,000 fallen soldiers. The Soviets had liberated the Taman Peninsula and sealed the door to the Caucasus forever. But the German 17th Army had escaped intact. Hitler recognized his soldiers' achievement with a new decoration, the Kuban Shield. In the abandoned German positions, Soviet soldiers found a sign that made their victory even more bitter. Here, the iron crosses grow.